There is a $1-2 billion industry that depends on you never learning what I am about to show you. Every spring, millions of gardeners head to the store to buy bottles of herbicide to spray on their soil. We have been doing it for decades. The weeds come, we spray, they come back, we spray again, and the companies that sell those bottles generate another $11 billion in the United States alone. But 483 kilometers west of Manhattan, in the rolling farmlands of Lancaster County, Pennsylvania, there is a community of over 44,000 people who have been growing food for more than 3 centuries without purchasing a single bottle of herbicide, not one, and their garden beds are far cleaner than most of us ever managed to achieve. I stood between rows of Amish vegetables a few years ago, staring at soil so clean it looked like someone had vacuumed between the plants, and I thought, what secret have these people unlocked that the rest of us are still paying to remain ignorant of? How are they doing this with no chemicals, no products, and no machinery built after 1850? Today, I am going to break down exactly what Amish gardeners do differently about weeds, step by step, so you can start using it this season. And stay until the end because the last technique I will share involves nothing more than a flattened cardboard box. It is the one thing that made me feel genuinely foolish for not having thought of it in 3 decades of gardening. Let me give you some context, because this is not just a gardening story. This is a story about a system designed to keep you buying, and a community that quietly opted out of it centuries ago. The modern herbicide industry traces its commercial roots back to the same post-war chemical boom that also gave us the pesticide treadmill we talked about in the last video. After World War II, chemical companies needed new markets for synthetic compounds they had been manufacturing for the war effort. Those compounds were repurposed from wartime production to agriculture almost overnight. Here's the crucial detail that should make you pause. The business model was never designed to permanently solve your weed problem. It was about managing it just enough that you come back next season and buy more. This isn't a conspiracy. It's basic economics. A product that eliminated the need for itself would be a terrible business. The global herbicide market now exceeds $34 billion and grows at about 5% every single year. More weeds, more products, more revenue. And it is not just the agricultural side. The home and garden herbicide segment alone generates billions because it has convinced tens of millions of home gardeners that weeds constitute an emergency, demanding an immediate chemical response. Walk into any hardware store in April and count the shelf space devoted to weed killers. Then count the shelf space devoted to teaching you how to times, not times, need them. The ratio reveals everything about where the financial incentives lie. Meanwhile, the Amish were standing in their clean gardens, watching the whole show and shaking their heads. They had already figured out something that the rest of the agricultural world is only now starting to prove with peer-reviewed science. You don't defeat weeds by killing them. You defeat them by creating conditions where they simply cannot grow in the first place. And that difference, that single shift in thinking, is worth more than every single bottle on the shelf at your garden center combined. Let me show you how it works. I will start with the part that surprised me the most. The story that unlocked this mystery for me starts underground, in a place most gardeners never think about. It is called the weed seed bank, and once you learn about it, you will never look at your garden soil the same way again. Research from Michigan State University has revealed that agricultural soils can contain anywhere from 56 to over 160,000 viable weed seeds per square meter. Let me say that again. Over 160,000 seeds in a single square meter of your soil, just sitting there right now. And here's the part that should genuinely alarm you. Those seeds are not all from last year. Some weed seeds can remain viable in the soil for 5 years, 10 years, even 20 years or more. Velvet leaf seeds have been documented germinating after decades underground. You might be fighting weeds right now that were deposited in your soil before you even moved into your house. And a single lamb's quarters plant, one of the most common garden weeds, can produce over 72,000 seeds in a single season. One plant, 72,000 seeds. And here is where it gets personal. Most of those seeds need two things to germinate: moisture and light. They can sense even a brief flash of sunlight. And what gives them that exposure? Tilling, digging, turning the soil over. Every single time you rototill your garden in spring, you are running a lottery, exposing thousands of buried seeds. You are reaching into the soil, pulling them up to the surface, handing them a ray of light, and saying, "Good morning, time to grow. I did this for 25 years. Every April, I fired up the rototiller and churned my beds until they looked pristine, like a magazine cover. Dark, fluffy, perfect soil. And 2 weeks later, a carpet of weeds every single year." I thought it was just how gardening worked. It was what my father did and what his father did before him. It never occurred to me, not once in 25 years, that I was the cause. That the act of making the soil look clean was precisely what was making it dirty. When I finally understood the seed bank, I felt like someone who had been mopping the floor with muddy water for 30 years and wondering why it never got clean. The Amish understood this principle long before modern science caught up. They disturb their soil as little as possible. They don't rototill every spring. Instead, they build on top. They add to the surface. They let the weed seeds stay buried in the dark where they cannot germinate. And over time, over years and decades and generations, the seed bank shrinks. The seeds that are buried deep enough lose their viability. The ones near the surface get eaten by ground beetles and other beneficial soil organisms. The population quietly dwindles, but only if you stop churning them up. This is why you can till a garden bed that looked perfectly clean and 2 weeks later it is covered in green. You didn't plant those weeds. You excavated them. So, here's your first actionable step, and it's the foundation upon which everything else builds. Stop tilling your garden every year. If your soil is already established, you do not need to turn it over again. Instead, every spring, spread 5 to 5 centimeters of well-aged compost across your garden beds and let the worms and beneficial soil biology work it in for you. The Amish call this building the soil, and they've been doing it on the same plots for over 3 centuries. When you stop disturbing the soil and start layering organic matter on top, 2 things happen. First, you stop exposing buried weed seeds to light. Second, you create a physical barrier on the surface, smothering any seeds attempting to germinate from above. Every centimeter of compost you add is another centimeter of darkness between the seed bank and the sun. If you are in cooler regions, zones 3 to 5, apply your compost 3 to 4 weeks before your last frost date. In warmer regions, zones 7 to 9, begin in late winter. And understand that this isn't merely about soil fertility. It's fundamentally about weed control. The Amish do not have a weed control program and a soil health program. They have a single, integrated program. The weed control is built into the soil health. But here is what most people miss, and it is the reason the next step made my jaw drop. Healthy soil is only the beginning. What the Amish do next is where this whole system transforms from smart to genuinely extraordinary. Now, let me tell you about something that sounds like it belongs in a chemistry textbook, but it is actually happening in Amish gardens every single fall and winter. It is called Allelopathy. And once you understand it, you will realize that certain plants are manufacturing their own herbicides directly in the soil. When the Amish finish harvesting their summer crops, they do not leave their beds bare over winter. They plant cover crops. Specifically, many Amish families in Lancaster County, Pennsylvania, and Holmes County, Ohio, plant cereal rye, and they have been doing it for generations. Here's why. Cereal rye produces a group of chemical compounds known as benzoxazinones. These compounds are released from the roots while the plant is alive and from its decaying residues after it's terminated. And what do? They suppress the germination and growth of nearby plants, including undesirable weeds. Think about that for a second. This is not a spray you purchase. This is a living plant producing its own chemical weed killer, exuding it from its roots directly into the surrounding soil, 24 hours a day, even while you sleep. Research published in Times Frontiers in Plant Science, and confirmed by studies at Cornell and Penn State, has documented that cover crop residues from cereal rye can suppress weed growth by up to 95% for 30 to 60 days after termination. 95%. Without a single drop of herbicide, without you lifting a finger. The rye is particularly devastating to some of the most common garden weeds: pigweed, lamb's quarters, purslane, and crabgrass. These are the exact weeds that drive gardeners to frustration, and cereal rye neutralizes them through chemistry the plant produces entirely on its own. When I first read that research, I sat staring at the page thinking, why isn't this information on the front of every gardening magazine in the country? Here is exactly how to use it. In late summer or early autumn, after you've harvested your summer crops, broadcast cereal, rye seed across your beds at a rate of about 9 to 1, 4 kilograms per 9, 3 square meters. Rake it in lightly, water once, and let it go. The rye will germinate quickly, establish a thick stand before winter, and survive even hard freezes. It grows through the cold months when everything else is dormant, quietly working its chemical magic in the dark. In spring, about 3 to 4 weeks before you intend to plant, cut the rye at ground level and leave the residue as a thick mat directly on the bed. Do times, not times, till it in. That is critical. Leave it on top. That mat does 3 things at once. It physically blocks light from reaching weed seeds beneath. It releases allelopathic compounds as it decomposes, chemically suppressing germination. And it retains soil moisture underneath, potentially reducing your need for watering by up to 30%. You transplant directly through the mat, cutting small openings for each plant. The rye does the rest. And here's a statistic that should make every gardener pay attention. Every year you do this, the weed seed bank shrinks even further. After 3 years of consistent cover cropping, Amish gardeners report that weeding transforms from a major weekly chore to an occasional 5-minute task. After 5 years, many say they barely weed at all. 5 years of building the system, and the problem that most gardeners fight for their entire lives essentially solves itself. That is the timeline. That is the investment. 5 years to revolutionize everything. Buckwheat is another cover crop the Amish utilize, but for a different planting window. Buckwheat is a warm season crop that achieves full canopy closure within 2 to 3 weeks. I've watched buckwheat go from bare seed to a solid white flowering carpet in less than a month. It is almost aggressively fast in how it claims a bed. The roots quickly establish in the soil, the broad leaves spread wide, and within days, no sunlight reaches the ground. Any weed seed attempting to germinate beneath that canopy is already doomed. It just doesn't know it yet. You plant buckwheat between your spring and fall crops. Let it smother everything for about a month. Cut it before it sets seed, then plant your fall crop directly into the residue. No weeding, no spraying, no bare soil exposed to the summer heat that would otherwise be prime time for a weed explosion. And buckwheat flowers are absolute magnets for pollinators. So, you get weed suppression and enhanced pollinator habitat in one strategic move. The Amish use it in the gap between their early peas and their fall brassicas, where most of us would leave bare soil for 2 months, spending every weekend on our knees pulling crabgrass. They grow a crop that does the work for them. Now, Let us keep going because the next technique is one of my favorites. This one sounds almost too clever to be true. And honestly, it is the technique that made me smile the widest when an Amish grower near Intercourse, Pennsylvania, explained it to me. It is called a stale seedbed, and it is essentially a trap, a clever deception, a setup. You prepare your garden bed as if you're about to plant. You rake it smooth, water it well, then do absolutely nothing. You walk away and wait. Within 1 week to 10 days, thousands of weed seeds near the surface will germinate. They see the light, sense the moisture, and think it's their time to grow. Then, just as those tiny seedlings are just emerging, barely visible, you return with a hoe and gently scrape the top one. 25 centimeters of soil, not deep, just barely scratching the surface, and wipe out that entire generation of weeds in about 5 minutes. Here's the genius part. By killing those seedlings before they set new seeds, you've just made a massive withdrawal from the weed seed bank without making any new deposits. You invited them to a party and then locked the door behind them. A single pigweed plant can produce 100,000 seeds. A single lamb's quarters, 72,000. Every weed you eliminate before it sets seed prevents tens of thousands of future weeds from ever existing. The math is staggering. Do this twice before planting 2 flushes about 10 days apart, and you can reduce weed emergence in that bed by 50 to 70% for the rest of the season. The Amish call it letting the weeds come first. Seeds want times to germinate. Fine. Let them. Then eliminate them before they can establish. This technique pushes your planting schedule back by about 2 to 3 weeks, but the time you save on weeding for the rest of the summer more than makes up for it. I used this on my bean beds last year and went from pulling weeds every 4 days to barely touching them all season. One honest note here. The stale seedbed technique works best for direct seeded crops like beans, carrots, and beets, where you're working with open soil. For transplanted crops like tomatoes and peppers, you'll combine this with the other techniques we're covering. The Amish layer these methods together. They don't pick one tool out of a box. They use the whole toolbox at once. And the technique I'm saving for last is the one that ties the whole system together in a way that will make you want to grab some cardboard from your garage right now. But first, let me show you what the Amish do with the empty space between their rows, because this is the part that changed how I think about bare soil forever. This next piece hides in plain sight, and it's so obvious it took me 20 years to notice. Amish gardens are packed. I mean densely, aggressively planted. There is no bare soil between plants. No open ground between rows. Every square centimeter is either a crop, a companion plant, or a living mulch. And there is a very specific reason for this. Weeds are opportunists. They are nature's way of covering exposed soil. If you leave soil bare, nature will fill it with something you did not choose. That is not a flaw in the system. That is the system working exactly as intended. Nature abhors bare soil the same way it abhors a vacuum. It will cover every exposed centimeter with whatever seeds are available. And in most gardens, the seeds that are available are weed seeds. The Amish work with that principle instead of fighting it. If nature demands that every square centimeter of soil be covered, then cover it yourself with something you actually want growing there. Beat nature to the punch. Fill the space before the weeds can. Between rows of tall crops like tomatoes and corn, the Amish plant low-growing white Dutch clover. It stays short, rarely over 10 to 15 centimeters. It fixes nitrogen from the air into the soil, feeding the crops around it for free. It creates a thick, living carpet that physically excludes weed seedlings. When it flowers, it attracts pollinators that boost fruit set on your tomatoes and squash. So, it is feeding the soil, fighting the weeds, and improving your harvest all at once. It reseeds itself year after year. You plant it once, and it works for you indefinitely. Research from multiple extension services has confirmed that low-growing clovers used as living mulch have minimal impact on yields of tall crops while significantly reducing weed pressure and improving soil nitrogen. It is free fertilizer that doubles as free weed control. I genuinely cannot think of a better deal in all of gardening. Combine this with close plant spacing, and you create a canopy that closes over the soil early in the season, shading out any weeds that try to establish. The crop itself becomes the weed barrier. That is the opposite of the wide-row, bare soil approach most garden guides recommend. Now, let me walk you through some patterns I used to follow religiously that the Amish approach completely dismantles. There's no judgment here, because I did every single one of these for longer than I care to admit. The first pattern is tilling every spring. I rototilled because my father did, and his father before him. The sound of the engine, the smell of freshly turned earth. It felt productive, but I was churning up thousands of weed seeds every single year and guaranteeing myself a summer of misery. I was essentially planting a weed garden every April, then spending every weekend from May through September complaining about it. The Amish taught me the cleanest looking soil is often the most weed prone, and the messiest looking surface, covered in mulch, residue, and clover, is actually the most weed resistant. That was a hard pill to swallow for someone who took pride in tidy rows of bare, dark soil. The second pattern is pulling weeds and leaving bare soil behind. When I pulled a weed, I left a hole. That hole was an open invitation for the next weed seed. The Amish never leave a gap. When they remove something, they immediately cover the spot with mulch or allow the surrounding plants to fill in. Every opening is temporary. The third pattern is keeping the garden times 2 times clean. Bare soil between rows might look organized, but it eliminates habitat for ground beetles and other soil-dwelling predators that consume weed seeds. A study from Cornell documented that ground beetles alone can consume up to 65% of weed seeds on the soil surface in a single season. 65%. While you sleep, a thin layer of straw, mulch, or a strip of clover between rows gives those allies somewhere to live and hunt. The fourth pattern is treating weed control and soil health as 2 separate topics. This is the big one. I did this for most of my gardening life. I had a fertilizer plan and a weed plan, and they never interacted. The Amish taught me they're part of the same conversation. Weak soil grows weak crops. Weak crops grow slowly. Slow-growing crops leave bare soil exposed longer, and exposed soil grows weeds. When you build soil biology with compost, cover crops, and minimal disturbance, your crops grow faster, close their canopy sooner, and outcompete weeds naturally. Build the soil, build the plant strength, and the weed problem quietly solves itself from the inside out. Now, here is something I learned from an Amish family that I have never seen mentioned in any gardening book, any gardening channel, or any extension office publication. It is one of those ideas that seems almost insultingly simple until you try it and realize it solves a problem you've been fighting for years. And it is the technique I promised you at the beginning. When the Amish prepare their garden beds in spring before transplanting a single seedling, they do something that looks almost strange if you have never seen it. They take flattened cardboard boxes, plain, brown, corrugated, the same boxes your deliveries come in, and they lay them directly on the surface of their garden beds and pathways. They overlap the edges by 5 to 10 centimeters, so there are no gaps. Then they cover the cardboard with 5 to 10 centimeters of organic mulch, straw, wood chips, shredded leaves, whatever they have on hand. That is the whole technique. A piece of cardboard and some mulch. It is devastatingly effective in a way that made me feel genuinely foolish for every dollar I've ever spent on landscape fabric, pre-emergent granules, and weed barrier mats. Here is why it works so brilliantly. And this is the part that will make you want to share this with every gardener you know. Cardboard is completely opaque. It blocks 100% of sunlight from reaching the soil surface. Every weed seed sitting in the top layer of your soil, every seed in that massive seed bank we talked about at the beginning just lost its germination trigger. No light, no growth, period. Remember those over 160,000 seeds per square meter. They're still down there, but with a sheet of cardboard between them and the sun, they are dormant, harmless, invisible. You didn't kill them. You didn't poison them. You simply turned off their switch. But unlike plastic landscape fabric, which creates a dead zone underneath, suffocates soil life, and eventually allows weeds to root on top of it anyway, cardboard is biodegradable. It breaks down over the course of a single growing season, roughly 4 to 6 months, depending on moisture and temperature, and as it decomposes, it feeds the earthworm population beneath it. Pull back a piece of cardboard that's been sitting on damp soil for a few weeks, and you'll find it absolutely crawling with worms. Those worms are aerating your soil, pulling organic matter down into deeper layers, and leaving castings that are among the richest natural fertilizers on Earth. So, the cardboard is suppressing weeds, building soil, feeding worms, and retaining moisture all at the same time, all for free. And it disappears exactly when it's no longer needed. Because by the time the cardboard breaks down 4 to 6 months later, your crops have closed their canopy, your mulch layer has thickened, and the prime window for weed germination has passed. For garden pathways, use 2 layers of cardboard and top with wood chips. You won't pull a single weed from those paths all season. For planting beds, lay the cardboard down and cut X-shaped openings where each transplant goes. Plant your tomatoes, peppers, squash, anything transplanted right through the cardboard. Then mulch around them. Your plants grow through the openings. Everything else stays smothered beneath the cardboard barrier. Use plain brown corrugated cardboard. Remove tape and staples if you can, though a few small pieces won't cause problems. Avoid glossy or wax-coated cardboard. Wet it thoroughly when you lay it down so it conforms to the ground and stays in place. That is the whole process. 5 minutes of prep per bed. I calculated what I spent on weed control products over a 10-year stretched landscape fabric, pre-emergent herbicides, weed barrier mats. It came to just over $400. The Amish spent exactly 0, and their gardens had fewer weeds than mine. The answer was sitting in their barn the whole time, folded flat, waiting to be used. Landscape fabric, the product I bought the most of, costs $15 to $20 a roll. Lasts maybe 2 seasons before weeds root on top of it, creates a dead zone of compacted soil underneath, and then you have to rip it out and replace it. Cardboard costs nothing, lasts exactly 1 season, which is exactly how long you need, builds better soil as it degrades, and then you lay a fresh piece next spring. The expensive product is inferior to the free one. Let that sink in for a moment. I started using cardboard in my own garden 4 seasons ago. Before that, I was spending 6 to 8 hours a week pulling weeds from my paths and between rows during peak season. Now, I spend maybe 20 minutes, not 20 minutes a day, but 20 minutes a week. The total cost across 4 seasons has been $0, and perhaps 10 minutes of laying cardboard on each planting day. I did the math once over 4 years. The conventional approach would have cost me somewhere around $160 to $200 in herbicides and replacement products. The Amish approach cost me nothing and worked better. That is the kind of quiet, practical wisdom that doesn't sell products, doesn't generate advertising revenue, and doesn't make headlines, but it saves your garden one bed at a time. And here's the thing that ties all of this together. The thing the Amish understand in their bones that the rest of us are slowly, painfully relearning. There is a German word that runs through every aspect of Amish life, like a thread through a quilt, Gelassenheit. It doesn't translate cleanly into English. but the closest meaning is something like yielding to the natural order, surrendering the need to control everything, and trusting that the system has a balance built into it. A balance that was designed long before we showed up with our spray bottles and our quarterly earnings reports. It's not passivity, nor is it neglect. It's the quiet confidence that comes from understanding how a system actually works and choosing to work times with times it instead of against it. In the garden, it looks like this. Instead of declaring war on weeds and trying to eradicate them with chemicals, you build a system where weeds simply cannot compete. You stop tilling so the seed bank stays buried. You layer compost so the soil feeds the plants that shade the ground. You plant cover crops that chemically suppress germination while you sleep. You trick weed seeds into sprouting early, then wipe them out before they matter. You plant so densely and mulch so thoroughly that no bare soil is left for weeds to claim. And when you need a barrier, you reach for a piece of cardboard that costs nothing, works perfectly, and disappears when its job is done. Each piece reinforces the others. Remove one, and the rest still work. Put them all together, and you have something that borders on weed-proof. It is not one technique, it's a philosophy, and it has been working on the same land for the same families for over 3 centuries, while the rest of us have been spending billions of dollars spraying hope onto bare soil. And once you start seeing the results, once you walk out on a July morning and your paths are clean, your beds are mulched, and the only green between your plants is the clover you put there on purpose, you'll wonder why anyone ever convinced us there was a better way inside a bottle. So, here is what I want you to take away from this. Stop tilling your garden every spring. You are waking up the enemy. Layer compost on top and let the biology work it in. Plant cereal rye in the fall and leave it as a mat in the spring. Let the chemistry do what the chemistry does. Use the stale seedbed technique before planting. Let the weeds come first, then wipe them out before they matter. Plant densely. Use clover between rows. Close the canopy early. Leave no bare soil for nature to fill with something you did not choose. And lay cardboard on your pathways and beds this spring. Cover it with straw or wood chips. It costs nothing. It takes 30 minutes, and it might be the single most satisfying change you make in your garden this year. Grab a few delivery boxes from the garage, flatten them out, wet them down, throw some mulch on top, and wait. When you come back a month later and find clean, moist, worm-rich soil underneath, with not a single weed in sight, you will wonder why anyone ever convinced us the answer was inside a spray bottle. The Amish have been doing this for 300 years. The science now confirms why it works. The only thing missing is you trying it. If any of this changed how you think about weeds, leave a comment and tell us what you are going to try first. We read every single one. For more deep dives into traditional gardening wisdom, follow Soil and Seeds. We have many more stories like this coming, exploring how traditional cultures around the world approach everything from composting to seed saving to water management. There are more secrets like this waiting to be uncovered. Thanks for spending time with us today. We will see you in the next one.